and hope that we'll get started, and we'll hope that he joins us. And if not, I'm hoping that Kendra would be willing to go out of order and give us her update in the hopes that Kale will in fact join us. So
I am here in case you can't see me.
I could not. I was looking everywhere for you. I am so happy. So happy to see you, Kale.
Yeah, I would not miss it.
How are we going to entertain people for that half hour, right? So welcome, everyone. Welcome both our committee members and those of you joining us to learn more about climate action plans and the committee's work. I'm Linda Bregan. I'm co-chair along with Eric Kopstein, who unfortunately could not join us today, but we co-chair Mayor Cooper's Sustainability Advisory Committee. In my other day job, I am a senior attorney with the Environmental Law Institute, which is an international NGO based in Washington, D.C., and I direct our Center for State, Tribal, and Local Environmental Programs. So the plan today is that we will first learn from our expert, who is in fact with us, Kale Roberts, who is with ICLEI Local Governments for Sustainability. And then we're really looking forward to getting an update from Kendra Abkowitz, our city's Chief Sustainability and Resilience Officer, about progress the city is making on implementing our committee's recommendations on mitigation measures for the city's climate action plan. And then I'll close with a brief update on the committee's next steps. So again, thank you so much for joining us today. And I would like to introduce our guest. Kale Roberts joined ICLEI USA team in 2016 to provide technical assistance to ICLEI members on greenhouse gas emission inventories, sustainability and climate action planning, and to develop climate vulnerability assessments. Since 2018, he has worked as network coordinator and communications lead while serving as a U.S. local government liaison to the United Nations. Before joining ICLEI USA, Kale worked with the United Nations Development Program's Climate Change Adaptation Team from the Bangkok Regional Hub. He supported countries throughout the Asia-Pacific region to develop proposals aimed at unlocking climate finance for adaptation projects. Kale is also a former editor of Mother Earth News, North America's largest sustainable living magazine, where he coordinated climate and energy content. From 2010 to 2012, he served as a U.S. Peace Corps volunteer in rural Thailand, where he worked on a project with the Thai Ministry of Energy to build home-scale biogas digesters and initiate carbon accounting in community forests. Kale received an MS in climate science and policy from the Bard Center for Environmental Policy and a BS in environmental science from Humboldt State University. We are delighted you could join us. You have such a fascinating background, and I'm going to hand it over to you for the next half hour. What I'm going to suggest is we leave a little bit of time and we can take a couple of questions. If you'll just use the raise hand function, that would be great. So over to you, Kale.
Well, thank you so much, Linda. That was a too nice introduction. I appreciate everyone sitting through that. What a great group to be with today. And it was, an honor for Kendra to have me, for Linda to introduce me, and to be here to talk about climate action planning at the local level, which, as was mentioned, that's really what I'm all about. And what ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability, is all about. So ICLEI, that's a funny name. It has a bit of a history behind that name. At one time, what was referred to as the International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives. This goes all the way back to the 90s, whenever a group of mayors around the US said, hey, there's a hole in the ozone layer. The rivers are so polluted that they're on fire, and local governments have something to do about it. Mayors are central to fixing this problem. So that group of mayors went to the UN, which happened to be having an environmental focused conference in New York, and said, hey, don't forget about us, United Nations. We know you're United Nations, but cities have a role to play. In that little event of them showing up was the International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives, became ICLEI, became an actual NGO, and still serves that special role today, now in an official capacity as that focal organization on cities and climate, nature, and land use and food, and things that pertain to how we promote development in a way that's sustainable for the long term. So that's the background, what ICLEI is all about. I'll tell you a little bit about the kind of frameworks and really latest trends in climate action planning, because it's not a static thing, right? It changes all the time, and it's a new field, it's an evolving field, and one that you all are really centered in moving forward. So let me get a little screen share going here. I think I have probably around like 20 to 25 minutes, right, left. Okay, good. We can breeze through these. I have a lot of colorful slides, so getting through them pretty fast, that can be fun. So here we go. Oh yeah, climate action planning, but integrated climate action planning, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that means. This is kind of a latest and greatest, the kind of trends is what we'll go through. Mention a little bit about ICLEI's past, serving that key role, but we're a community, right? This is a community of cities and counties across the country and around the world, with Nashville, Davidson, as one of our prides and joy. So growing out of this years of work, is this understanding that sustainability planning, kind of putting that climate consideration aside, thinking bigger, sustainability planning is a comprehensive, endeavor. You all will know that. Reaching a future that's, livable, that's vibrant, where everyone thrives, means social sustainability right alongside environmental. And economic prosperity, partnerships and peace, so much goes into that. The UN has its framework of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. There's 17 of those. They're very comprehensive, but there's also a lot of them. So ICLEI has devised this 5 pathways approach, which we feel really captures how local governments are tackling these challenges. The climate work is part of that. That's the decarbonization pathway. We also work on, circular economy, equity, community resilience, and nature. You can pull them all out more often. They're very integrated. What Nashville does with ICLEI is work in each of these pathways, and just wanted to, flash up on the screen to show you that there's, the kind of some thinking that went into each of these. So the low emissions pathway, for instance, has its own kind of framework within it that, analyze where you're at today. Maybe that's an emissions inventory, climate, vulnerability, understanding, assessment. Then you can move into setting goals, taking action, implementing those, those plans, and accelerating, working regionally, extending your leadership to help your neighbors out. All of that's in that acceleration mode. So kind of that traditional planning cycle, right? The analyze, act, accelerate, but applied in a way that's about really ambitious climate goals, and ultimately striving for carbon neutrality by 2050, which means about a 60% reduction in emissions by 2030. So in the next 8 years, at least 50 and more emissions reductions. So these are big goals, right? That cities are making, and we offer this tools, technical assistance, and the community, right, to get there. Not going to spend any time, but just to say, each of those pathways has its day, right? And its set of tools and resources. We'll spend our time today talking about the climate pathway and the climate action planning. Just digging in a little bit more to this kind of project management framework. It begins with leadership. That is the core to climate planning, sustainability planning, is that committing to take action at all. And this is something that Nashville has been great at doing, is stepping up in your region, especially in your utility region, and showing that it is possible to have these ambitious goals. Then it's moving into that baseline and target setting. I just wanted to point out that you all are in this critical phase in the cycle on climate action plan that's ambitious, and that here's the integrated. I kind of previewed that when we talk about climate action planning in an integrated way, we're bringing equity and resilience as really the entry points. So sure, it's about carbon emissions reduction, but that mitigation pillar that's been so historically up front and center, understanding that stands side by side with equity and climate adaptation as a pillar. If you all were watching the news this week, outside of what's happening in Europe, you might have seen that the UN's scientific body on climate released a pretty big report about what our world is facing, and it's pretty stark. So let's begin with adaptation. Here is that report. It was called the Sixth Assessment Report from the Ipcc. Just all you need to know is a group of scientists that think about this day in and day out, about what impacts are across all sorts of things. I mean, these are like anthropologists and sociologists right side by side with actual climate scientists. And here's the takeaway. You don't need to read the report. It all fits into one screen. Every 1/10 of a degree of warming matters. So this is out on Monday. So this is like hot off the presses, right? Limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees, which is what the goal of the Paris Agreement is. And our world's more on track for a 2+ degree. It reduces the risk, the number of people exposed to climate-related risks by the hundreds of millions. So that 1/2 degree really matters to the social well-being of people on our planet. Just as another example, at 2 degrees, which we're on track to exceed right now, coral reefs nearly entirely disappear. Just a 1/2 degree cooler, meaning that 1.5 target, 30% chance of coral surviving. And a couple more metrics that came out of that report. Twice as many plant species, 3 times as many insects. All of these critical to our food supply, could lose at least half their habitat under a 2 degrees future, where much less, much more friendly environment for food systems in a 1.5 degree. All to say, those Paris Agreement targets really matter, and they matter most for the most vulnerable people around the world and in our community. It's already locked in. These folks that are bearing the brunt of climate impacts now will be into the future. It can be helpful to think about where we go from here in terms of a carbon budget. This on the screen is globally. So some of the work we do is try to help a city determine, okay, what's our carbon footprint? What is our responsibility to the global community, vulnerable populations in our own backyard, in our own neighborhoods, and then half a world away. And we can come up with these figures like we've got a carbon budget of 460 gigatons, whatever that number would mean. But this report spells out that in recent years, we've already emitted 36 gigatons. If we stay on this track, we'll blow past our carbon budget in about a decade. So bunch of bad things. I don't want it to be depressing. I want that to just show like it's an emergency moment, and it means real things, life and death terms, to the people who are bearing the brunt of the climate crisis. Let me jump ahead here a little bit, because this is something that Nashville is working on right now in its vulnerability assessment is thinking about the community. Oh, it says New York here because New York State created this diagram, but any community can use it. Thinking about our city in terms of systems, right? And a multi-layered system mindset is how we can approach this work. So the natural system, our human environments, our governance, and the work that you all are part of, each a system that can overlay over each other, and then breaks down into many more systems. I'm in New York, by the way, so that's why I've got this climate smart New York program mindset on my mind. But have visited your city many times and love it in lots and lots of ways. So just to say that this kind of system mindset has many things involved in it, right? Like the food supply, we talked about that, agriculture, water, drinking water systems, telecommunications and cell phone systems, all the many cultural assets. I mean, you're one of the United States cultural centers, and thinking about how climate impacts each of these systems is how we address it, and think in terms of this right here on the screen is a vulnerability assessment process in action. And you all in Nashville have already had a series of these workshops where you're looking system by system and thinking about high heat, thinking about precipitation changes and what is impacting each of those systems. What comes out of it and the work that we do at Ipcc is these kind of like heat maps is what we call them. It's like a confusing term because they're not always about heat. They're about all sorts of climate hazards, but ranking, where are we at in terms of the intensity of an impact. Let's talk about heat for the example. Like when a high heat event strikes, how vulnerable is each system? And then now what are the abilities of each of those, neighborhoods or schools or whatever to adapt when that high heat event strikes? Heat wave instances. This is data I pulled for Nashville coming into today. That's showing me where we're at today is about 3 to 4 high heat wave. That's actually heat waves. So whenever a high heat event lasts 5 days or longer, at about 3 or 4 now, next 8 years or so, we'll see 5 instances of that high heat event. Looking out into 80 years from now, so like the kids being born today, what they're going to face. 15 incidents on average of 5 days or more of high heat, and high heat is like 95 degrees or higher. So we're talking entire seasons of the year that is a heat wave, and that's on the books. Like that's projected for Nashville. So every 10th of a degree matters, which brings us to our next pillar. Mitigation. What do we do to avoid that kind of impact in our community? Many communities are joining this campaign. It's a UN sponsored, but it's a very local in what it feels like, called the Race to Zero. So that's racing to zero carbon. And they're doing this by determining that, what needs to happen now in the next 8 years to get there. We call it a science-based target, but it's essentially a calculation that tells you what emissions reduction would Nashville need to meet by 2030 to even have a chance to get to 2050 climate neutrality. What we found at Ipcc, doing some analysis around this with 150 cities all over the US, is it is possible. It is achievable to meet these goals, but we need to focus on 3 high impact areas. And those 3 are the grid, renewables, pretty much decarbonizing the grid, buildings, and transportation. We call those the accelerating. Those are the big 3 actions, but we understand that there are other supporting actions that must kind of lay a groundwork to achieve those. So that's things like sustainable food systems, like starting a composting program, nature-based solutions, and then making sure that equity is addressed at every step of the way. Without those kind of supporting functions working really well, we won't have a chance, you know, to build that foundation to get those high impact actions. So I was thinking about the Race to Zero, and like, what if we had a Nashville Davidson in the Race to Zero? So something for you to think about. I'd love to be supporting the community to reach that kind of goal. It is not something that's the city county government responsibility alone. This level of need is only met by broad stakeholder, you know, consensus and working and partners and private money, you know, flowing into the city, government grants, you know, from the federal government being accessed, a lot that goes into it. And that's where you all have so much, you know, power, and you are the connection to getting this kind of work even off the ground. I'm going to skip ahead about this, like the team building. Just know there, we work with cities with internal teams, like cross-departmental, and then with groups like you all. And bringing us to our final pillar, right? So we had 3 pillars. We talked about mitigate or adaptation first, leading with resilience, then mitigation. Now we're thinking a little bit about equity. ICLEI approaches our equity work through 3 dimensions of social equity. And so that's access, participation, and opportunity. And essentially it's that any action that goes into a climate plan. I mean, you may all have dozens and dozens of things that you put in your climate plan, adding that mile of bike lane, running a weatherization program for a neighborhood, many, many more things. Each one of those actions can be thought about through the lens of access. You know, who has access to the benefits of that action? Participation, you know, who was involved, middle, beginning, end, never, you know, just asking yourself those questions. And then the opportunity, who gains and who loses and who's in the middle, you know, for each one of those actions in your plan. And that's really the opportunity where equity can be woven throughout the process, well into the future. And that it's about asking those questions and getting the answers, and then kind of being willing to say, hey, let's pause where we're at, because we haven't gotten the answers because we don't have the right people at the table to answer those questions. And recognizing like, yeah, we wanted our climate plan done at the end of this year, but we need to adjust our time frame because it's worth it. And so we also think in a little bit more detail on the spectrum of community engagement. I'm sure many of you have seen this before. Some great groups out there working on this kind of stuff use this, but it's thinking on moving from a kind of a low engagement, low equity space or a spot on your journey to a place of empowerment, where the local government is really empowering the community across, you can see here, goal setting, messaging, activities, resource allocation, and so many more, you know, moving to the right on this spectrum to a place of empowerment. City of Baltimore, I just wanted to pull out an example to make this a little more real. In their sustainability plan, they recognize they have a big city. And it's very segregated in a number of different ways. And kind of, you know, Nashville also has very distinct neighborhoods. So they were almost going to take this approach of, let's not do one sustainability plan, let's do one per, I think they call them wards. Let's do one per ward and see how they line up. So they took this approach of a ward-based prioritization in their plan, and then recognized some neighborhoods are under-resourced, some were primarily Black residents, some primarily non-English speaking, and they came to consensus about weighting the preferences of those neighborhoods higher than essentially the richer neighborhoods. But all neighborhoods came to consensus that that was an appropriate approach. They called it targeted universalist strategy. That's a little technical for me, but essentially like prioritizing the most vulnerable is what it came to. So I won't spend too much time. I know I'm probably getting close there. Me, like I used to go to neighborhoods and communities and say, hey, look at this great plant, the great structure. Will you come to a workshop and join us? And then we would have, I don't know, a handful of people show up. And we saw that happen time and again in many communities. So we worked with City of Hayward. This happens to be a city in California facing the same issue. And we're like, let's find different messengers. We're not telling a story. We're not the characters that people want to see in this story. But there was a great group of students at the high school that we trained to be these youth climate ambassadors. And then they went door to door talking about heat, actually handing out these packets and explaining the information to their neighbors about impacts to come. And they said, hey, by the way, next week or whatever, we're going to have a workshop. Will you show up? It had 250 or 300 people show up to this workshop simply because the students. So that's just a little aside to say, choose your messengers, and they're often the kids. And I think I'll pause there at that in case I'm over time. I do want to get a time check.
You are actually great. You have
Okay.
7 minutes left. It would be nice if anyone has questions to use the raise hand function under the reactions tab so we can gauge whether Cale should keep on talking or we should turn to questions. So we'll go back to
Great.
you. I don't see any right now.
Great. Yeah, unmute and just call it out. I think I only have like 4 more things. It was some like recommendations of where we could go from here
I think
together.
they're muted, so they're going to have to raise hands just the way this was set up. So
okay, I'll watch out and we'll stop too. So just a few ways that communities work are doing some things this year. One is to recognize that value of nature in climate planning, right? And to kind of pave the way for conservation to be given its full value in our plans. So ICLEI is working with a group of communities this year to do some forest and tree carbon accounting, and also look at things like health benefits, people's access to nature, tree canopy, and some others, in order to be able to fully account, right, for the benefits of our street trees as well as our forests, maybe on the outskirts of town. Knowing that we might reach a future where a city could be paid for keeping forests intact. And so I'm hopeful to work with Nashville on kind of laying that groundwork as part of your climate planning. Another thing to think about is the UN's SDGs. I kind of previewed those, but they can be a really useful model for understanding that a climate plan is not just about emissions. It's about gender equality. It's about reducing inequality broadly, unlocking the climate opportunity, as they say, which is like there's lots of jobs and financial gain to be had. To make this transition to a future that's more resilient. And so determining what's unique about Nashville's situation to unlock that climate opportunity. And I think the SDGs are a lens to try to get at that answer a little bit. So I work with a cohort of communities. Some of those are listed here, and it'd be good to bring Nashville into this group of SDG leadership cities. Last one is, we've talked a lot about climate. Nature is having its moment. nature needs its Paris Agreement. And that's being kind of discussed at the high level. What happens in cities, though, is to be part of that discussion. And you can do that by Nashville joining the Cities with Nature. This is totally free, by the way. But being part of this global community of practice of city representatives who are acting on nature side by side with their climate plans. Okay, the last one's an actually exciting little plug. We just announced this on Tuesday, but Ipcc was given a large amount of money, a couple $1 million for, not for us to use, but for us to pass on to a few communities in the country who are following those steps to reach carbon neutrality. And it's to fund a handful of projects that could be replicable anywhere, but they're going to happen in Nashville. If you apply. So it's not for the city or county government to apply. It's a nonprofit, local community nonprofit that can apply, but are going to work side by side with Ipcc and the city county government to deploy the action. So because you are the group you are, and you have a lot of contacts who are in the nonprofit space there on the ground, I wanted to make sure you know about this, because we'd love to explore what a scalable solution in Nashville could be. We'll do an info session here in a couple weeks. So Kendra will have the dates and times for that. And then there's this April 11th deadline to apply for an expression of interest. So it's not a full proposal. It's kind of just pitch your idea by April 11th, and then we can work with you from there. So with that, thank you for the time today. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Kale. And that's really exciting about the funding opportunity. Well, we do have time for at least one question. And Todd Lawrence, I see you have a question.
Kale, Todd Lawrence with Urban Green Lab here in Nashville. Thank you so much for your presentation today. Really appreciate the information and perspective. I really thought the idea about wards was intriguing, creating a separate sustainability plan per ward or neighborhood. I'm wondering if you can just say another word about that. I'm curious to know if all of those individual plans in Baltimore wrapped up into a master plan. I like the idea of rankings and the sort of the vulnerable communities, but I'm just curious if they all kind of wrapped up into a master plan and how that was done or achieved. Thank you.
Yeah, great question, Todd. And it was. So there is only one Baltimore sustainability plan, but it was the compilation of all these mini plans. You know how lots of planning efforts have working groups or task forces? It kind of was that. It's just each neighborhood was its own working group or task force. And there were a lot, though. There were like 30. So they took 2.5 years to make it. And that's where I'm like, don't be afraid to hold your horses if it's meaningful in the end. And for Baltimore, it has been. And they're doing a lot more because they built that kind of foundation of awareness and buy-in all over the city. So when it came time to do the projects, they're able to get to doing it a lot better.
So it really wasn't broken down by issue; it was broken down by population, which helps to secure the equity piece a little bit more in the planning.
Yep. Yeah, that's great. I mean, it's the people over there in Baltimore who worked on it. They always love to talk to other communities about it. So I'm always happy to connect them. It's Lisa McNeely is their sustainability coordinator, and she'll love that.
Thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much. I'm going to try to keep us on time unless someone has an incredibly pressing question. I don't see any hands. Oh, John. Do you have a quick question?
My questions are never quick. I'll just follow up with Kale and with Kendra afterwards.
Okay. All right. Well,
thanks, John.
Thank you so much. I love that self-awareness. If only more people had that. Right now we're going to get an update from Kendra. As most of you know, Kendra joined Mayor Cooper's office as Chief Sustainability and Resilience Officer for the city of Nashville, Davidson County in October. She has totally hit the ground running. She's a rock star. In this role, she works across the metro departments and throughout the community on a wide range of environmental, sustainability, resilience, and conservation issues. And Kendra, I think you're going to be updating us today on some of Metro's recent activities. So over to you. And again, put your hands up using, the little hand app if you have questions for her.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the kind introduction, Linda. And thanks to Kale from Ipcc for your great presentation and sharing sort of all the excellent activities in the climate action planning world and how Ipcc is supporting local governments and Nashville in particular. So I'm so excited to be speaking with this group again. I think the last time I spoke to you all, I was maybe 3 or 4 weeks on the job. And so am just continually impressed by all the incredible work that Nashville is doing. And when I say Nashville, I mean Nashville and all of the organizations that work and support Nashville. Just have been so pleased every time I learn about new and exciting opportunities and initiatives that are ongoing. So I have a couple of just high level slides that I'll share with the group today. Let me set up. Are you all seeing a slide that says Sustainability Advisory Committee proposed actions? Yeah, okay. So just to kind of bring everyone back to the same starting point, this is a slide that you all actually saw when I presented last time, but I recognize that not everyone was able to attend our last meeting. And so I wanted to kind of quickly ground us in where things stand. And you all are well aware of this because you've been intimately involved in this work and are the creators of these actions that move forward. So really my main goal with this slide was just to again reiterate that we've kind of worked through this process of honing in on some activities that are really ripe for near-term action and trying to strategize again around how we can have the highest return on investment and impact in the near term, and then selecting those that are perhaps better suited for more strategic and long-term execution. And so I think the biggest update that I have to provide to this group is I was very much in the midst of the process of trying to come up with, again, kind of between 10 and 15 different priority climate action plan recommendations. And through the great work that this group has done, and then conversations I had with metro departments and many external stakeholders have really been able to kind of come up with that core set of 10 to 15 priority actions. I want to make sure I'm clear though in sharing with you all that all of the recommendations matter, and it's not necessarily an exhaustive representation of what we'll be tackling. It just may be those higher priority actions. And if the stars align for tackling other actions that aren't necessarily within those high priority actions, we will definitely and absolutely move forward with those. So again, this slide should look familiar to you as well. I think in the original presentation, it was broken out by kind of category area and recommendation area. Two significant updates to share with you all in terms of what's already been accomplished since I last presented. The first is that in early February of this year, Metro Council formally adopted a Metro government and community-wide target for greenhouse gas emissions reductions and regular progress tracking. That was adopted in large part due to the fact that it was recommended by this group in the climate action plan recommendations. And so we did move forward with that recommended target of an 80% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, both at the metro level and community-wide from a 2014 level by 2050. So again, I want to make sure I am thanking each of you for the hard work that you put in to that plan and that recommendation in particular. And then something that just unfolded over the past few weeks was we joined the Trust for Public Lands 10-minute walk campaign. And so this is really a follow through and pairing an existing commitment with some technical assistance resources to make sure that we are actively engaging in activities that are going to make parks more accessible to the entire community. So the goal here is to make sure that at least 50% of Nashvillians have access to a park within a 10-minute walk. So we're very excited about partnering with the Trust for Public Land. I know Noel's on our call today, and so huge thanks to them for their support, and more to come on that particular initiative moving forward. So I also wanted to provide a quick update on what's in the works. Again, some of these things will sound familiar, but we have actually seen more things actually move into the actual implementation and execution stage. So February, as you can tell, was a very busy month for us. One of the items we kicked off was an update to our greenhouse gas emissions inventory. I want to make sure that I'm giving a shout out to Laurel Preach and the General Services team. That is going to be an update based on 2019 year data. And again, it is a slightly delayed in terms of when we were able to collect all of that information and then actually produce that update. And so we kicked off the information gathering perspective in February, and are hopeful that later this summer, early fall, we'll be able to publish updated numbers. And so this is incredibly important for us in that it helps us to make sure that we're understanding where we should be prioritizing our time from an emissions mitigation perspective. And it allows us to measure progress in terms of where we're reducing our emissions. And so I'm very excited to get those updated numbers. And it'll be sort of a good data point for us to understand if we're trending and moving in the right direction, particularly in light of that recent adoption of our greenhouse gas emissions reductions goals. Also in February, we officially kicked off a 600 site solar feasibility assessment on metro properties. So this was an idea that we were very seriously considering when I last spoke to this group. We ended up actually securing funding from Metro Council to perform that assessment, and have been working very closely with a consultant as well as NES to shape and scope out that work, and officially started that work last week, actually. So we're very excited to be able to understand where sort of our high return on investment sites for potential on-site installation of solar will be across the metro portfolio. It's not a mandate to move forward and install solar. It's really kind of a prioritization exercise to help us understand which properties we really want to focus on for seriously considering installation of on-site solar. So very excited about that. It's a great study and an effort to be able to pair with our previous significant investment in utility scale solar through the TVA Green Invest program. The last item that we just kicked off last week was also our energy benchmarking efforts across metro facilities. So for quite some time, within various aspects of Metro's building portfolio, we have done a good job of really understanding energy consumption, but not necessarily within others. And so this is our first effort to work across metro facilities to really gather robust information about energy consumption. And so we're looking at electricity, natural gas, water, chilled water and steam, as well as billing information to really identify where there may be more opportunities for increasing the energy efficiency and operations of our facilities. We will be making that information available to the public, and it's a precursor effort to something you'll see later here in this list, which is an energy savings and public reporting program for large buildings. So again, we want to make sure we're leading by example before contemplating potential rollout of a program across Nashville. Coming soon, later this month and throughout the spring, we will be launching a public engagement component to the climate action plan that you all have developed. And so wanted to put that on your radar screen. We've been working closely with the Civic Design Center to craft that, and more to come moving forward. I believe Linda will also provide some information on that later today. Also coming later this spring is our launch of our environmental indicators dashboard. So I believe I referenced this when I first presented to this group, that being that we really don't have a great clearinghouse for data and information that discloses to the public how we're performing across a variety of different environmental sustainability, resilience, and conservation areas. Beyond that, management of those responsibilities are also relatively dispersed across metro government agencies, and then a variety of different community partners such as yourselves. And so having a centralized location to track that information is really important, I think, to measuring progress and identifying opportunity areas. And so we'll have the beta version of that environmental indicators dashboard coming out this spring, I think, with full recognition that there will be lots of opportunities to improve and add to that over time. So that initial dashboard is going to be primarily focused on data that Metro curates. But over time, I think an excellent opportunity to pull in this group is making sure that we're appropriately representing metrics that reflect performance across the entire community and how our different partners are contributing to that information. We continue really robust conversations focused on EV infrastructure and electrification of metro fleets, as well as other alternative fuels well suited. So as you all know, there are a variety of different fleets that Metro operates, and each of those present significant opportunities for us to decrease mobile source emissions. So that is still very much a conversation that we're aggressively pursuing, and are really looking forward to some federal and state resources that may be available to help us aggressively pursue some of that work. We're also working very closely with Tony Richmond and his team at NES to think about how we can really support installation of EV infrastructure across the community, and recently kicked off our engagement in that activity with some information asks. I already touched on the energy savings and public reporting program for large buildings. Also a significant project that we're investing quite a bit of resources in right now in partnership with NES is LED streetlight conversions. And so there's a great opportunity for us to realize a number of different co-benefits and benefits associated with that project, and are hoping to have a strategy for how we finance and deploy that work moving forward. Conversations about more robust and innovative stormwater management strategies and low impact development continue. We're also looking to pilot between 2 and 3 resilience hubs, specifically in areas where we know that communities have an existing need for a variety of different social and environmental needs moving forward. And then we'll be looking to also expand that Resilience Hubs program in the future, potentially in partnership with a variety of different stakeholders. There's also been a lot of conversation, robust conversation in the past few weeks about development of a comprehensive resiliency plan, or I think as Kale would encourage us to talk about, integrated resiliency plan that includes aspects of the great work that Janie and Jacqueline led as part of their adaptation strategy and work, as well as environmental equity and inclusion. And so as Kale noted earlier, while it is biting off an incredibly large scope of work, there are real strengths and benefits to bundling all of those activities together to have kind of a unified strategy that hits on multiple potential impact areas. So that's something we're very seriously considering, and will likely kick off probably in 2023. We're also continuing our work to explore a conservation finance initiative for acquisition and maintenance of green spaces. Piloting of residential compost collection is still something we hope to roll out in the coming months, as well as expansion of Nashville's monthly curbside recycling program, and then longer term strategies for regional solid waste management and diversion is something that I'll be working very closely with Sharon Smith and our Metro Waste Services folks on. So that's all that I have in terms of updates from Metro side of things. I think we've got a couple of moments for questions.
And I'll ask one if no one's going to raise their hand. Oh, good. Jonathan Gilligan. Oh, good. And then Ian.
Thanks for that terrific presentation, Kendra. I have one question. Is one of the priority actions that was listed in the report from the committee was reducing the number of miles driven by passenger vehicles? And I'm interested what initiatives Metro is taking in working towards that, specifically in the community.
Yeah, so that's a great question, Jonathan. And we're taking a multi-pronged approach. A variety of things that we're considering right now is looking at improvements within the existing mass transit system. So increasing accessibility and convenience and efficiency of those operations. And I would say that those are probably more of the short-term strategies, but then also long-term looking at multi-mobility and complete streets. As well as kind of expansion of those core mass transit services. So those are all things that are on the table and things that we are considering very seriously. I know Steve Bland from MTA is on the line, so I encourage him to expand if helpful. And then we also have a new NDOT director who comes to us from work in areas where, again, multimodal strategies were very much a part of what she did. So we're very excited about exploring all of those things together. Steve?
Yep, Kendra, I can jump in for a second. Yeah, we're pursuing the Better Bus program that was incorporated into the city's transportation plan that was adopted back in 2020 by the council. So we're scheduled to do the next round of service improvements in April, which is about a 7% increase. And then we placed into our budget submission a request for the next 2 rounds of service improvements next fiscal year. So we'll kind of see how that works its way through the Metro budget process.
I'll also share that as many of you all know, there's a lot of conversation about development along the East Bank. And so with that comes an opportunity to also look at how development along the East Bank can allow us to leverage transit improvements there and infrastructure improvements there. And so I think that will present quite a bit of conversation topics. And I think we're hopeful will also contribute to that larger strategy for improving transit across Nashville.
Ian, did you want to jump in with a question?
Yes, please. Thank you. And first, I'll also echo Jonathan's feedback. It's so exciting to see this comprehensive list and the direction our city's going and the speed. So thanks for sharing that, Kendra. One thing that had been previously mentioned was leveraging third-party funding mechanisms to accelerate and expand these initiatives. And I didn't know if you had any updates there.
So I think that's a strategy we are always interested in. One area where I know that Nashville historically has not been particularly strong, in large part because we just haven't dedicated significant resources to it, is kind of leveraging philanthropic investments. And so I think that's an area where we'll be investing resources and trying to strategize again at how we can do more with less and perhaps leverage those resources to accomplish a lot of this work. So that is definitely going to be a focus area of ours moving forward. I think paired with that is also thinking through how we can leverage significant federal dollars that are available to support a variety of sustainability and resilience topics moving forward. We've been working very closely with a number of different parties, both internal to Metro, external to Metro, research and academic institutions to kind of help jumpstart our proposal and scope of work processes to try to, again, have some good plug and play projects, or at least somewhat thought out scopes of work that are then well suited to sort of piece together a variety of funding sources. And so that's actually something I'm spending quite a bit of time on in the transit area in particular, is trying to mobilize some of those ideas so that we can better leverage those resources moving forward.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Kendra. Janie, do you want to ask a real quick question before we wrap up? We have about 2 more minutes before we.
I was going to ask about the potential to leverage the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act funding as it's, thinking about, building better for the future as opposed to, those off the shelf projects. And thankfully, Kendra, you mentioned federal funding and looking at that. But I would like to know, to what extent are we working? I know Rebecca Doan was on with Metro Water. To what extent are we actually thinking about being more proactive and, just for the example of culverts and thinking about stormwater management and those things, as those funds become available, I think it'd be prudent to say, let's not design for, historical storm events, but think about how we can be better prepared for the future and consider those vulnerable populations that may be more impacted by urban flooding. So,
yeah, no, I think that's great. A couple of things that I'll mention in response to that. On IIJA in general, and Janie, I know you're well aware of this. This is one of those where we're so anxious, and the vast majority of federal agencies are still sort of in their grant design efforts. And I think we're hopeful that depending on the federal agency, we'll see some of those application periods roll out as early as kind of April, and then throughout the summer. And so understanding kind of exactly how they plan to scope those particular grant programs, I think will again better allow us which are better suited for some of the more traditional approaches to sustainability and resilience work, and then which ones are kind of again more innovative and forward thinking. I definitely hear you and agree with you on designing for the future as it relates to stormwater management in particular. You're probably aware of this as well, Janie, but it's something I didn't include in my slides, but maybe of interest to the rest of the folks on the call. Metro Water Services is engaging in a very robust stormwater master planning effort. And so that's pretty, it's going to be a multi-year process. And I think is going to have a lot of ties and open up a lot of opportunities for us to kind of reassess where we are as a city today, and then also where we think we're going to be as a city in the future, layering in things like updated extreme weather event data and information, but then also demographics that can speak to environmental equity and inclusion. And so I think that effort will tee us up for being able to better have that conversation. We'll probably have to complement that stormwater master planning effort with some additional sort of sideline research or assessment efforts. But it's definitely something that is first and foremost on my mind, but also that of Metro Water Services. So Rebecca, I'm not sure.
Well, we're
still there, but if you
out of time, I'm sorry.
Oh, okay.
We're out of time, and I was going to do a committee update, but I think we don't have time for that. I'm sorry. But I do want to thank Kale and Kendra for speaking with us today and for 2 great presentations. I know Kendra will post your slides on the committee website. Kale will ask you if that's possible. We are going to be moving forward with the committee, forming some new work groups around working and collaborating with the business community, additional education and outreach, and also some environmental justice work. So we will be keeping everyone updated on that. Please do fill out the survey when it is available online. We will email it to the committee. We want your friends, your family, everyone to fill it out so we can get input on the climate action plan. A recording of today will also be posted online. So thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you to our speakers. We hope you'll join us for our next quarterly meeting on July 28th at 2 o'clock. And enjoy the rest of this incredibly beautiful day.
Hi, thanks everyone.